In this lecture, we're going to finish talking about the glands and hormones of the endocrine system. First, we'll talk about the adrenal glands. They sit on top of the kidneys, and there's two regions. The adrenal cortex is the outer glandular region, and it has 3 layers. So mineralocorticoids are secreted by the outermost layer, glucocorticoids are secreted by the middle layer, and sex hormones are secreted by the innermost layer. And there's also another structure called the adrenal medulla, and that's the inner neural tissue region. So here you can see the adrenals are situated atop of the kidney, and then you can see the cortex is broken into where the mineralocorticoids are secreted, glucocorticoids, and sex hormones are secreted, and then the deepest layer is the medulla. Mineralocorticoids, which is mainly aldosterone, are produced in the outer adrenal cortex, and they regulate mineral content in the blood. And so they regulate water and electrolyte balance. They work on the kidney primarily as their target organ, and they are affected, or their production is stimulated, by renin and aldosterone. And production is inhibited by atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. So here you can see the mineralocorticoid producing region is the organ that's impacted here, and it's impacted by a decrease in sodium or potassium in the blood. It can also be impacted indirectly by a decrease in blood volume or blood pressure. That impacts the kidneys. So then renin and angiotensin act directly on the mineralocorticoid producing part of the adrenal cortex. And then it's also impacted by ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. And then it also can be influenced again by blood pressure. So any of those different inputs can enhance the secretion of aldosterone, and its target is the kidney tubules in the kidney, with the overall effect to increase absorption of sodium and water and excrete potassium so that we increase blood volume and blood pressure. The adrenal cortex also produces glucocorticoids. That includes things like cortisone and cortisol. They're produced in the middle layer of the adrenal cortex. They promote normal cell metabolism, and they help to resist long-term stressors. And they're released in response to increased blood levels of ACTH. Your body does have different responses to very short-term stress and more prolonged stress. So short-term stress might be like if you have an event that is sudden and causes the release of something like epinephrine or norepinephrine. And so short-term impacts from epinephrine and norepinephrine include like an increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. Your liver converts glycogen to glucose so that your blood sugar can go up. It will dilate bronchioles to make ventilating your lungs more easy. It can change blood flow patterns so that you have less blood going to digestive organs and more blood going to like muscles for readiness. And then if you have more prolonged stress, then you're going to see a longer presence of ACTH, and that's going to cause like mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids to be reduced. So your long-term stress response causes retention of sodium and water by your kidneys, increased blood volume and blood pressure. It also can cause proteins and fats to be converted to glucose or broken down. It can increase blood sugar and suppress the immune system. So long-term stress is not generally a great thing to have going for a really long time. The adrenal cortex also produces some sex hormones in the inner layer of the adrenal cortex, and so they produce small amounts through life. This is not the primary organ that produces sex hormones, but it does produce some androgens, mostly things like testosterone, and then some estrogens, which are female sex hormones. There are some disorders associated with the adrenal glands, and they include Addison's disease. This results from hyposecretion of adrenal cortex hormones. Symptoms can include a bronze skin tone, muscle weakness, burnout, and a susceptibility to infection, so a little bit of a decreased immune response. Another disorder of the adrenal glands is hyperaldosteronism. This can actually result from an ACTH-releasing tumor, so that impacts the adrenals, and it can lead to excess water and sodium, which are retained, and that can lead to high blood pressure and edema. So edema is just fluid retention, oftentimes in your limbs and mostly in your legs. People get swollen ankles and things like that. That can be caused by edema. Another disease is called Cushing's disease, and it results from a tumor in the middle of the cortical area of the adrenal cortex. And the symptoms include sort of some physical characteristics like the moon face or the buffalo hump on someone's back, high blood pressure, hyperglycemia, so high blood sugar, weakness of bones, and then depression. And there's also something called masculinization, and that's if you have hypersecretion of sex hormones. So if the adrenal glands are producing too many androgens, people can end up with more masculine traits than they should. And so it can impact women mostly and cause beard growth and male distribution of hair growth. Next, we'll talk about the adrenal medulla. And so it produces two similar hormones. They're called catecholamines, and it produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are the hormones that prepare the body to deal with short-term stress, so fight or flight things. They increase heart rate, they increase blood pressure, they increase blood glucose levels, they dilate small passageways of the lungs. So these kidneys are again formed in the medulla, so that's this innermost layer of the adrenal gland. Next, we'll talk about the endocrine tissue in the pancreas. They're called the pancreatic islets. So the pancreas is actually a mixed gland, and it has both endocrine and exocrine functions. The pancreatic islets produce the hormones insulin and glucagon. Insulin allows glucose to cross plasma membranes into cells from beta cells. So insulin is what allows blood sugar, so the glucose that's in your bloodstream, to enter your cells to be used for metabolism. And then glucagon allows glucose to enter the blood from alpha cells. It releases sugars into the bloodstream. So it increases blood sugar while insulin decreases blood sugar. And so these hormones are antagonists, and they help to maintain blood sugar homeostasis. And if you did not know where your pancreas is, it wraps around kind of the posterior region of your stomach. Within the pancreas are these cells called islet cells, and those are the cells that produce insulin and glucagon. And here you can see the alpha cells and beta cells, and those produce separately insulin and glucagon. So we talked about how insulin and glucagon act as antagonists to regulate blood sugar. So if blood sugar gets high, so it has become higher than normal, maybe you just ate a meal or something like that, insulin is going to be released, and that's going to cause blood sugar to be pushed out of your blood into your cells to be used. And that will bring blood back to normal sugar levels. If you haven't eaten in a long time, like you've skipped a meal or you've done a whole bunch of activity, your blood sugar probably is going to go down, and then that's going to cause glucagon to activate the release of sugar from glycogen molecules that are stored in your liver, and eventually that will bring sugar again back to a normal homeostatic level. Next, we'll talk about the pineal gland. This is found also in your skull, so it's on the third ventricle of the brain, and it secretes something called melatonin. Melatonin helps to establish your body's wake and sleep cycles, so kind of helps with those circadian rhythms, and it also is believed to coordinate the hormones of fertility in humans. So the pineal gland is really small, and it's kind of on the posterior side of your skull. You can see where it is there. Next, we'll talk about the thymus gland. This one is located posterior to the sternum, so just deep to your sternum, that bone on your chest. It's largest in infants and children, and it produces thymosin. It matures some types of white blood cells, and so it is important in developing your immune system. Next, we'll talk about the gonads. So ovaries are in females. They produce egg cells, and they produce two groups of steroid hormones. They produce estrogens and progesterone. And then in males, you have testes, and they produce sperm, and then they produce the hormones that are androgens, including testosterone. So in females, the ovaries are located inside of the pelvic cavity. You'll notice that the testes in males are external. And that's because the temperature needed to develop sperm cells needs to be slightly cooler than body temperature. First, we'll talk about the hormones of the ovaries. So estrogen stimulates the development of secondary female characteristics. So that's, body hair distribution and all that kind of thing. And it matures the female reproductive organs, so uterus, ovaries, etc. And then progesterone, estrogen also helps to promote breast development and regulate the menstrual cycle. Progesterone acts with estrogen to bring about the menstrual cycle, so both of those hormones play a role in the menstrual cycle. They're both elevated at different times. Progesterone also helps with the implantation of an embryo in the uterus, and it helps prepare best for lactation. So progesterone is kind of the maintenance hormone for pregnancy. In males, the testes produce several different androgens. Testosterone is the most important androgen. It's responsible for adult male secondary sex characteristics. It promotes growth and maturation of the male reproductive system, and it is required for sperm cell production. There are several other tissues in your body that are glandular tissue, which means they can produce some hormones, and they include parts of the small intestine, parts of the stomach, parts of the kidney, the heart, and then there's endocrine cells in small pockets in many other areas of your body. In a female who is pregnant, the placenta is also an endocrine organ to some degree because it produces the hormones that maintain the pregnancy. Some hormones play a part in the delivery of the baby too. So the placenta produces human chorionic gonadotrophin in addition to some extra estrogen, progesterone, and other hormones. Endocrine organs are generally functional throughout your life. However, in women, menopause is when the efficiency of the ovaries decreases, and so estrogen production starts to slow dramatically. And there are some problems like hot flashes and things associated with reduced estrogen. Growth hormone production also declines with age, so that's much more common in children than it is in adults. And many endocrine glands decrease output with age.